Have Leeds, Burnley and Sunderland got their recruitment right? Have they done enough in the recently concluded and closed transfer window to ensure that they break the curse and one, two, or even all three of them are able to survive in the Premier League this season? We discussed this on Three at the Back yesterday over with Conor McGilligan and Matt SB. I'm going to run a few clips and give a few more takes from my end. We'll start off with the good news because we were all pretty optimistic about Sunderland.
Probably the most standout window we've seen in terms of money being spent and the va-va-voom around these signings since probably Nottingham Forest, I'd say. Matt, what are your thoughts on it? It's pretty strong, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, it's a really good comparison, that. And I remember at the time when Forest came up in 2022 that everyone said, oh, they're going for quantity over quality. But the thing is, when you bring in so many players, you don't need all of them to work. As long as 50% of the players you brought in are effective, then, I mean, you look at the money they've spent. You know, speaking about Leeds United not quite showing that ambition. You said that Sunderland have spent, 170 million? Going forwards, I think they look really dangerous. And that's with the players they've kept from last season as well. Like I say, Wilson, Isidore and Mayenda. But I like the Ajax connections there with Brobbey and Traore. I can't roll my R's as well as you, Conor, but those two coming in look really decent. And Mukiele, you touched on him. Do we know how long Dan Ballard's out for, by the way? Because he was out after the Burnley game. But I thought Mukiele came in and did a decent job against Brentford.
Yeah, he did. I think he's out for two-ish games. I don't think it's a long term, but I could be wrong. Sunderland fans, let us know. Another one to touch on, Matt. Another one to touch on as well is Robin Rouf's in net, who's looked brilliant for 11 million quid as well.
Yeah, saved a penalty, didn't he? And he's looked really solid. Slipped in quite nicely, hasn't he? And that was the thing I was going to touch on with the defence. That I think when we spoke about transfers about 2-3 weeks ago, Conor, I said really like Sunderland's team going forwards in the middle. Just think Ballard's the main thing holding them up at the back. And if he gets injured, which he has, thankfully not for long term, then who's going to come in? And Mukiele's come in. Him next to Ballard with Roofs behind. Looks really, really strong.
Ben, anything to add on Sunderland? It's been a good one, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the Nottingham Forest comparison because it's similar but different. Because Forest essentially would argue they had no players because of the loans and it was a surprise promotion. Although I suppose is any team being promoted without parachute payments now a surprise promotion? I guess it is. And Sunderland were in League One a few seasons before. But then to be fair, they're in the playoffs a couple of seasons before as well. So whether it's, I don't know whether this is, I'm just trying to find out the blueprint. You make a good point about the keeper though, Conor, in that it's underrated sometimes, that position, isn't it? And Ipswich really fudged that up in terms of Muric not working and then having to sign Palmer in the middle of the season. And I think it's an underappreciated position if you can just have a solid keeper who comes in and saves the shots that they should save and doesn't throw anything in or do anything completely ridiculous. So both Matt and Conor pretty impressed with what Sunderland have done. I would tend to agree. And they've done a lot, haven't they? And we've spoken about promoted teams being damned if they do and damned if they don't, and people being very wise after the event. And that is now going to happen. Obviously, if you don't sign lots of players in this modern world with the complete chasms in, what you're doing in the Championship and what you're able to do in the Premier League, you're accused of not being ambitious. If you sign lots of players and then you get relegated, you wasted your money. You can't win. It's all retrofitted around did you survive or not. But yeah, Sunderland definitely pushing the boat out, and hopefully it gives them the best chance possible. Of course, we could be sat here at the end of the season and they are relegated, and then everyone will run the narrative, well, haven't been in the Premier League for a long time, built the asset base, built stars, etc., etc., which I dare say my team, Ipswich, are in on the other end of now, because they got the money, built the asset base, allegedly, and now rebuilt another team down in the Championship. And yeah, it's nice to be promoted, but sometimes, just a bit of stability and a new squad every year not happening might be a fun thing. But yeah, pretty positive on Sunderland over on the show. Less positive, though, about Leeds United. And I asked Conor after the Harry Wilson debacle, should Leeds have had more of a focus on recruiting for the front end of their Premier League 11? Here's a clip. Yeah, do you think that they should have offset some of the money to, use in that part of the pitch?
I don't know where it's gone. They went for Igor Paixão, obviously, which was the big one they were studying on. They were willing to go up to 40 million for him. Rodrigo Muniz at Fulham, they put in a 32 million pound bid for him.
It's not that they haven't tried.
It's not that they haven't tried, but I just think that there's a guy up the road who does a pretty decent job in the Championship, who used to play for Matt's team as well, who they could have got done very easily, and Gustavo Hamer, very, very a connector.
Yeah, that was rumbling the day before, actually. I was getting texts about that one, yeah.
I'm astonished he's still at Sheffield United, I've got to be honest.
And you look
what about Josh Sargent as well, who's still at Norwich? Who's worked with Farke before, and I mean, you can pull a face, but you can pull that face with Lucas Nemecha and Dominic Calvert-Lewin as your two number 9s, though. Do you know what I mean?
You can, yeah, you can. You can definitely do that. Yeah, I think they were aiming for like a higher bracket, but I think they've been extremely naive, and that doesn't bode well.
Then, Conor, if they couldn't get the higher bracket, then isn't the wise thing to do invest it in the other areas of the pitch? I'm playing devil's advocate.
I think the problem is when you look at a team that's been out of the Premier League since 2014, they've managed to do it. Why have Sunderland managed to do it? Why can't we?
Yeah,
we have to an extent. We have to an extent. Jacobiel, brilliant signing, Anton Start. But you go to the front ember of the pitch, of which Sunderland have managed to recruit, some Champions League players in there.
Would they have done it if they'd had more? If they had another £50 million PSR headroom, they would have done it, wouldn't they?
Well, this is the
which
issue.
Is the rules working against them as well.
Yeah, of course. But there's a part of PSR that you've got to manufacture, isn't there? There's the outgoings as well.
Fascinating conversation there. They say comparison is the thief of joy, but Conor, who is a Leeds fan, clearly annoyed when you compare what Leeds have been able to do and what Sunderland have been able to do. I don't know how he and the Leeds fans would be feeling if they had managed to get Harry Wilson over the line, or the player Conor was talking about in terms of connecting up from what looks fairly solid, and the numbers would tell us, they've had 2 clean sheets already in the Premier League, a fairly solid, keeper, 4 and then a 3 or a 5, or however you want to, lay out the way Leeds have been playing in the opening couple of games. I guess I understand the sense of disappointment. I raised the PSR issue, and I have looked back. Some of the comments are saying, "Oh well, Ben, that's just an excuse which the 49ers group can hide behind." Maybe that's true. I'd be interested in people's takes on that one. Are they being sensible if they can't get their main targets? Or is the Premier League just not a sensible place? There's not room to be sensible. You just have to get in the best players you possibly can at whatever cost and try and challenge. But yeah, I will always bow to Conor's superior knowledge on Leeds United because he studies them day in, day out. And I guess I understand the kind of ambient sense of disappointment around Leeds' transfer window. We were a bit in the middle with Burnley, where was it a disaster? No. Was it the most ambitious window we've ever seen? Probably not. Here's a clip.
We've spoken about the 62.7 million net expenditure, Matt SB. Burnley. I still feel a bit underwhelmed by that. I think it's a bit of a measured rebuild with what they've lost. I think there's a lot of sensible signings in there. It's not enough, Matt SB, for me.
I wonder, because obviously Burnley have gone up and down a few times over the last few years. Are they wary of, the consequence of spending too much and not being therefore as strong when they come back down to the Championship and it feels like they've been quite careful with their business. I do like some of the signings. I touched on Ugochukwu being one that I thought would do all right this season. I mean, obviously they've re-signed a lot of the players from last season. Jaden Anthony, he's been good so far. Of course, you touched on him earlier, got a couple of goals. Dubravka coming in. They got another keeper as well, didn't they? Was it Vase? They got Hartman,
Vice,
Walker. Yeah. It's reasonable business. It's just not the word I'm going to use is ambitious. It's not quite ambitious, and I think in the middle, I just worry depth-wise. If Cullen was to pick up an injury, what happens in the middle? I don't see enough depth there. But it's sensible business, I suppose you'd say, for a club coming up that was probably expected to go back down. But then, you know, you make the argument, how are they going to break that cycle and stay in the Premier League? Have they got to show more ambition?
So hard for these promoted teams, isn't it? You listen to some of the words used in there, you know, underwhelming and lack of ambition, and one person's stability is the next person's lack of ambition. I guess the net number Conor was referring to would also factor in sales, and I assume a big chunk of money came in for James Trafford, who was obviously maybe the star player in the promotion team that got 100 points for Burnley. So I do tend to agree with the boys, and we are at the point in the Premier League where if you come up and you do spend 20, 25 million pounds on a player, that's a really big deal for you. But again, with comparison being the thief of joy, that's a bench player for Bournemouth or for Brighton or for Fulham, or name a team, Brentford, that have traditionally been in the middle of the table. So that is what you're up against. So I can kind of see the theory that Burnley were a team that, albeit scored 100 points last year in the Championship, they obviously ranked what would have been 22nd in English football, and they need to rank 17th or higher in English football this season. And have they made great strides from the 22nd ranked team? Maths was never my strong point, to sort of bridge that gap. It's very, very tricky. So I do get that sense that, yeah, take your stability, but there does need to be a little bit of a sprinkling of fairy dust and star power on top of it. But hey, look, as a fan of a team that was up and had all these patronising things said about them when you're just trying your hardest, and the analogy I use for promoted teams is it's like somebody busting their gut in a running race and someone else from the sideline saying, why don't you just run faster? Go on, run faster. And you're like, I'm trying my damnedest. Honestly, I'm trying my damnedest. What else do you expect me to do? So there you go. Give me your thoughts in the comments. You can do it here on this video on the transfer business and the transfer window and the general approach and your hopes for Leeds, Burnley and Sunderland. You can also head across to the Conor McGilligan channel, where I would suggest you subscribe as well to see this show each and every week through the season, and give your view over there and maybe read some of the views of Leeds, Burnley and Sunderland fans there. If you want to do that, you can click up there. And if you want a little bit more on the Championship transfer window, I did a full roundup yesterday of what was going on in the second tier. Typical bonkers business on the final day. You can see that down there. Go and check it out.